Chapter 73 The Scheming Mother. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After a beat, Zhang Yi heard someone knocking. It was Uncle Yu. Zhang Yi, it's you Jiguang. You home? That he checked the security camera, a habit by now. Zhang Yi's brow furrowed. Standing there with Uncle Yu was a woman holding a kid, even bundled up in a huge down jacket. Zhang Yi knew it was crazily, the mother. What's she doing here? Zhang Yi liked Uncle Yu well enough, but he wasn't friends with crazily, plus, based on his past life's instincts, he just didn't trust her. Zhang Yi got up and headed for the door. Zhou Qi just glanced over, leaving it alone. Zhang Yi was the boss of this house. Reaching the door, Zhang Yi didn't open it. Uncle Yu? He asked, playing dumb. Uncle Yu confirmed, yeah, it's me. Then crazily piped up from behind him, Zhang Yi, my baby's got a raging fever. Can you help us out? Her voice was trembling with emotion. Zhang Yi grabbed the acetaminophen suspension and the kid's cold medicine he'd stashed away and tossed them out the peephole. Get that kid medicated, stat. Getting sick in times like these is no joke. Uncle Yu snatched the medicine from the ground, relieved. Zhang Yi, thanks. Seriously, thank you. Crazily took the meds. Uncle Yu started to lead her away, but a strange look flashed in her eyes. Zhang Yi, she said, I need to ask you something. Could the baby stay at your place for a bit? You've got a heater, right? It's warmer in there than at our place. She's sick, and I'm worried about her getting chilled. Could you do us this solid? Uncle Yu was clearly caught off guard. Crazily hadn't mentioned any of this beforehand. He was mortified, having not even cleared this with Zhang Yi beforehand. Now crazily was putting him on the spot, which was beyond awkward, but seeing the pleading look in crazily eyes, he didn't know what to say. Inside, Zhang Yi smirked when he heard crazily request. Trying to weasel her way in. Look, Sister Xia, I'm really sorry, but I can't let anyone inside right now. And besides, we're running low on coal. To be honest, it's not that much warmer in here. Zhang Yi wasn't about to fall for her sob story. Crazily was playing nice, all for the sake of her kid, but neither he nor Zhou Qi knew the first thing about taking care of children. And even if they did, he wouldn't waste his time on something so pointless. If he let the kid in, crazily would just follow right behind, claiming she needed to care for the baby. Easier said than done getting rid of her then. If she had ulterior motives, Zhang Yi would have to be on guard 24/7, no thanks. Hearing Zhang Yi's refusal, Uncle Yu whispered to crazily, Zhang Yi's already doing us a huge favor, giving the kid medicine and all. Let's just head back and bundle up so she doesn't get cold. Crazily dabbed at her eyes. What do you know? You're a man. The baby's so small and fragile. Then she turned her attention back to the door. Zhang Yi, I know this is a big ask. But I'm desperate. A friend in need is a friend indeed, so I'm shamelessly asking for this favor. Please, for the sake of the baby and brother Yu, just let her stay for a little while. That she was really laying it on thick now, dragging Uncle Yu into it too. Most people would cave at this point. She'd started with a small request to soften him up, then, once he agreed to that, he'd feel obligated to say yes to the bigger one. This woman knew exactly what she was doing. Crazily had deliberately avoided talking to Uncle Yu in advance, waiting until Zhang Yi had already given the medicine to spring her request for the baby to stay, but she underestimated how hard-hearted Zhang Yi could be. Zhang Yi leaned against the door, arms crossed. Sister Xia, if this was before the world went to hell, I'd totally say yes. But now? You know how it is. Everyone in this building is trying to rob me blind, trying to kill me. I'm spooked, okay? I can't let strangers in. I'm sure you understand, right? Uncle Yu, you get it, right? Uncle Yu nodded furiously. He was totally embarrassed to be caught in the middle, but he was so grateful to Zhang Yi that he didn't want to keep pushing. Yeah, Zhang Yi's been great to us. Who else would give us medicine? You know how hard it is to find that stuff now. Crazily bit her lip, not arguing with Uncle Yu. She just looked pitiful, tears welling up in her eyes. But what about Zhou Qi? He let her live there. Zhang Yi scoffed. Zhou Qir's my girlfriend. You got a problem with that? Zhou Qir, who was eavesdropping on all this, knew Zhang Yi was just trying to smooth things over, but a smile still crept onto her face. When it comes to sweet talk, women care way more than they do about the actual truth, even if it was a lie. She could convince herself it was real. Xia Lime frowned, clearly trying to think of something else to say, but Uncle Yu wasn't as thick-skinned as she was. Zhang Yi had helped him out multiple times already. He wasn't about to push his luck, so he grabbed Xia Lime and said sternly, "Let's go. Don't cause trouble." Zhang Yi's been more than generous. Don't take advantage of it. Seeing that Uncle Yu was getting genuinely upset, Xia Lime immediately switched gears, looking aggrieved. Fine, I get it. I didn't want to do this either, but it's all for the baby. Uncle Yu called out to the room, "Sorry about that, Zhang Yi. Don't mind her." "Thanks again for everything," Zhang Yi replied, "No worries, I get where you're coming from. We all gotta look out for each other." Watching the security feed, Zhang Yi saw Uncle Yu leading Xia Lime and the baby back downstairs. He returned to the table and said to Zhou Qir, "That woman's trouble." Zhou Qir shrugged. "Aren't there a lot of people like that?" Zhang Yi conceded, "True. But I like Uncle Yu. I don't want her messing with our future plans." Uncle Yu was the perfect worker bee for Zhang Yi's schemes. Zhang Yi didn't want some woman filling his head with nonsense. He was definitely going to be more cautious around Xia Lime from now on. At the very least, she clearly wanted his house and supplies. Chapter 74. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Uncle Yu ushered Xia Lime and the kid back inside. As soon as the door was shut, his face clouded over. "What was that you were saying? You can't just ask someone to watch your child. It's a madhouse out there now. You can't tell who's human and who isn't. The fact that he'd give medicine to a kid? That says he's good people, someone you can trust. Why are you pushing your luck like that?" Xia Lime, cradling the child, settled on the bed to give him his medicine, peeling off his clothes to feed him milk with it. She didn't argue, just looked up, all vulnerability. "Isn't this all for the baby? You know she's the only thing keeping me going. If something happens to her, what's the point of me being alive?" Tears started up again. Uncle Yu glanced at her exposed, pale breasts, and felt a mix of tenderness and frustration. His voice softened. "Look, it's not that I don't get it. But you gotta have some sense of owing someone, you know." Thinking of Zhang Yi's 2 acts of help, Uncle Yu slapped his thigh inside. "If it wasn't for Zhang Yi, I wouldn't have even thought about stocking up, and I'd be dead now. Yu Jiguang, gotta find a way to pay back that debt, big time." Just then, Xia Lime's quiet voice drifted over. "Actually, I don't think you need to be so grateful to Zhang Yi. I mean, he's still keeping you at arm's length, right?" Uncle Yu frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Xia Lime looked frail. "Think about it. If he really trusted you, wouldn't he have opened the door when we passed by, let us in to sit a spell? He just tossed the medicine out the window, didn't even show his face. Doesn't that make you wonder?" Uncle Yu bristled. "Don't talk crazy. The guy's doing us a favor. Why twist it like that?" Xia Lime remained calm, her voice a low murmur. "I'm just saying, he helped you, but it didn't cost him much. Maybe he's just doing a little favor on purpose, hoping you'll be his muscle down the road. If he was such a great guy, would he have gone all brutal, killing dozens of neighbors like that? Unless he's willing to let us stay in his place, I won't believe he's a saint. He's got a big house, there's plenty of room for us 3. What's the harm?" Before she could go on, Uncle Yu roared, cutting her off. "Enough!" His face flushed, and he glared at her, scaring her. The baby in her arms started wailing. Xia Lime quickly soothed the baby, murmuring, "I'm sorry, I misspoke. Everything I said was for your own good. We have to be cautious at a time like this, right?" Uncle Yu's tone was cold. "Don't ever say things like that again. Yu Jiguang, can still tell the difference between a good person and a bad one. If I'm suspecting my benefactor, then I'm lower than dirt. Uncle Yu was honest and decent, but honest and decent didn't equal stupid. Sure, maybe Zhang Yi had an angle, so what? Nobody does anything for nothing in this world. He'd lived over 40 years, worked as a security guard for more than 10, seen how things worked. He wasn't blind. Xia Limei, sensing Uncle Yu's anger and knowing she'd pushed too hard, clammed up, but that didn't mean she was giving up on swaying Uncle Yu. Zhang Yi's warm house was her dream. Xia Limei glanced down at the 8-month-old baby in her arms, a new determination hardening her gaze. Baby, I'll pay whatever price to keep us both alive. That night, white moonlight bathed the silver earth in a desolate glow. The snow had been falling for almost a month straight, sometimes heavy, sometimes light, but never stopping. The snow in Yuelu community had piled up to the 4th floor, blanketing everything in white out of habit. Most people were asleep. The ground floor entrance of Building 25 was buried under tons of snow, sealed tight. Suddenly, the snow near the entrance seemed to shift, a few ice chips falling to the ground. Then, a large chunk of snow bulged outward and burst open. A shovel poked out of the hole. Soon, the hole widened, and a dozen figures, bundled in thick clothes and armed with shovels, crowbars, and axes, clambered out. The leader was short and wiry, with hollow cheeks, but his eyes were sharp and unsettling. Once inside the building, he kept his voice low. "Let's go," the group cautiously, weapons at the ready, started up the stairs. Their formation was tight, with some in the front holding boards and pans as makeshift shields. On the 10th floor, they bumped into a resident sneaking downstairs to collect snow. Without a word, a burly man swung his shovel, slamming it into the resident's head. Asterisk thwack, star, blood splattered across the wall, and the man collapsed without a sound. The attacker looked at the body and asked the wiry man at the head of the group, "Second uncle, what do we do with him?" Second uncle replied, "Leave him for now, pick him up on the way back." The group obeyed and continued to climb. Their target, apartment 2401. Zhang Yi was asleep. He had locked Zhou Qir in the second bedroom next door. The outsiders reached the 24th floor in silence. Despite the climb, they didn't seem exhausted. They weren't amateurs, these were professionals. The group reached Zhang Yi's door, but nobody rushed to smash it down. The second uncle held up a hand, signaling the group to halt. He turned and said in a low voice, "Old donkey, get up here." A middle-aged man in a gray wool cap stepped forward. He carried a gray backpack. "Open the door." The second uncle pointed at Zhang Yi's door. The old donkey nodded. "Watch and learn." He approached Zhang Yi's door, set down his pack, and quickly produced various tools. Most obvious was the detonator, along with several rectangular blocks wrapped in yellow tape. After a few tense moments of fiddling, everyone scrambled back down the corridor. Boom! The deafening explosion shook the entire building. Everyone inside was jolted awake. Zhang Yi was no exception. The blast had been right outside his door, and his ears were ringing, his eardrums throbbing. Chapter 75: The Power of White Phosphorus. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi was on it fast. He leaped out of bed in his pajamas, snatched his pistol from the safe, clicked off the safety, and gripped it tight. He flipped on his phone and checked the security feed. Living room, all clear. He saw Zhou Qir in her room, looking terrified. She was huddled in a corner, wrapped in a quilt, her head buried in her hands. The house was empty. Zhang Yi breathed a sigh of relief, then he checked the outside cameras. That's when he saw a dozen or so shady figures lurking around. They were armed with shovels, crowbars, planks, and axes. One of the planks looked familiar. Zhang Yi squinted at the screen and realized it was a piece of red plywood, the kind you see all the time on construction sites. Zhang Yi knew for a fact there weren't any construction crews in their building, but next door in number 26, there was a crew working on a nearby site, maybe a dozen guys, all crammed into a rental house paid for by their company. When the smoke cleared, they rushed to the door to see if the blast had worked. These guys were pros. They knew exactly what they wanted. Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi's blood ran cold. Word of his family's stockpile must have gotten out. Outside, his second uncle and the others were gaping at the unblemished metal door. "Hey, old donkey, what kind of hack job is that? Your homemade crap couldn't blow open a doghouse." The worker next to him snapped at old donkey. Lao Lu looked bewildered. That's not right. My mix is always solid. Maybe, it got damp. Lao Lu was the explosives guy on the crew, but he was used to moving earth, so, while his blast was loud, it didn't pack the punch of professionally prepped explosives. Otherwise, even if it didn't breach Zhang Yi's door, it would have brought down the wall beside it. Basically, it was more noise than destruction. Zhang Yi felt a surge of relief when he saw the house was intact through the app. But at the same time, his anger was boiling. These guys wanted him dead. Fine, he'd send them to hell first. The crew outside was still griping, and some had already started hacking at the door with their shovels. They didn't notice the small window sliding open in the metal door above their heads. Zhang Yi lit a Molotov cocktail and tossed it out. The flames erupted. Zhang Yi wasn't done. He grabbed several small white vials from the safe, filled with an almost transparent liquid. These were bottles of white phosphorus dissolved in sulfur dioxide, a crude version of a white phosphorus grenade. White phosphorus was hellfire. It burned at over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, incinerating everything in its path. The explosion spewed burning fragments that stuck to skin and were almost impossible to remove. The wounds were horrific. It wasn't just deadly, it was psychologically devastating. The use of white phosphorus weapons was banned internationally, but Zhang Yi didn't give a damn. Anything was fair game if it killed the enemy effectively. The Molotov cocktail hit the ground, the flames catching, but it wasn't enough. These guys had been trudging through snow, their clothes were soaked, and it was hard to get them to ignite. But the burning bottle created a pool of flame, vaporizing the sulfur dioxide and causing the white phosphorus to ignite. Instantly, the air blazed at thousands of degrees. Flames splattered on their clothes, impossible to extinguish. The hallway was instantly transformed into an inferno. Zhang Yi's attack was beyond their wildest expectations. They froze, stunned. Many were caught in the fire of the burning white phosphorus, and the down jackets and insulated coveralls they wore were perfect tinder. Aya! Help me, help me! The screams were like something out of hell. To be burned alive was the worst death imaginable. Most people couldn't handle even getting their finger burned by a match. Imagine every inch of your body engulfed in flames. Zhang Yi wasn't satisfied. He pulled out his pistol again and opened fire. Bang! 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 He didn't care about saving ammo. He squeezed off rounds like firecrackers. Bodies started dropping. Of the dozen or so intruders, 8 lay dead or dying, and only 5 or 6 managed to scramble away. Zhang Yi didn't risk chasing them. Safety first. He double-checked to make sure the attackers were dead, then closed the firing port and activated the air filtration system to keep out the smoke. Zhang Yi glanced at the empty gun in his hand and shook his head. These things are useless. Good thing I didn't buy a machine gun, or I'd have burned through 100 rounds. He needed to find some real firepower, ASAP. Before all this, he hadn't felt a pressing need to be armed to the teeth, but today, these workers had given him a wake-up call. In the apocalypse, only the ruthless survived. The people he'd be facing in the future would all be stone-cold killers. One day, some engineer could roll up with a ton of explosives and level the building. Okay, that was an exaggeration. Enough explosives to do that would be almost impossible to come by, but still, Zhang Yi was taking no chances. You sons of bitches, I'll kill every last one of you. Zhang Yi hissed. He walked to Zhou Qir's room and opened the door. Zhou Qir was still huddled in the corner, her head buried between her knees. It's okay, Zhang Yi said. When Zhou Qir heard Zhang Yi's voice, she felt a wave of relief. Even though he was overly cautious and always acted so aloof, right now, he was her only source of comfort. She looked up at Zhang Yi. I wasn't scared. I just thought it was an earthquake and figured it would be safer to hide in the corner. Zhang Yi chuckled. On the 24th floor. An earthquake will flatten you no matter where you hide. Zhou Qir stood up. What was that noise just now? Zhang Yi sat on her bed before Zhou Qir moved in. This place was stark, almost sterile, without even a blanket on the bed, but now, it felt warmer, more lived in. Pink velvet quilt, yellow sheets, her black lace underwear and stockings hung drying on the windowsill. she was definitely a woman who liked the finer things, not just her room, but the entire apartment, including Zhang Yi's bedroom, was spotless, thanks to her. Zhang Yi thought, it really is nice having a woman like this around. If it wasn't for the apocalypse, a woman like this would cost you a fortune to marry. Chapter 76 The Trina Gang in Building 26. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi told Zhou Qi what had happened. It was those workers from number 26 next door. With that new development going up, a ton of workers are renting around here. Zhou Qi was curious. Isn't our place considered pretty upscale? You think they can afford it? Zhang Yi said. How expensive do you think it is to cram 10 people into a single room? Zhou Qi nodded, understanding, then her expression turned serious. So, they're actually more dangerous than Chen Zhenghao, Zhang Yi agreed. Chen Zhenghao was just a small-time thug. Before, people were too afraid of causing trouble to mess with him. But now, everyone's on edge. If he didn't have a gun, he'd be worm food by now. These workers are different. They do hard labor every day. They're way stronger than regular folks, and they know how to fight. Plus, they all know each other, and there are a lot of them. They can get away with anything. Zhang Yi took a deep breath and sighed. Good thing I took out that fat guy with the explosives yesterday. I wouldn't sleep a wink otherwise. Zhou Qi asked, what's the plan? Are we gonna get revenge? Zhang Yi raised his eyebrows. Of course, I want revenge. But I'm not going over there. It'd be stupid to go onto their turf. Besides, didn't I take out most of them already? Zhou Qi was speechless. But you have a gun. Even with a gun, no way. Zhang Yi said confidently, even if I killed every last one of them, I'd feel like I got the short end of the stick if I got hit with a shovel. Zhou Qi rolled her eyes. You're too cautious, way too cautious. But if you don't go after them, how are you gonna get even? They don't seem like they're afraid of dying. They seem like they have nothing to lose. After all, who in their right mind would be playing with explosives in an apartment building? One wrong move and they'd be history. Zhang Yi touched his chin, an idea forming. Looks like if I want to live peacefully around here, I need to find some cannon fodder. Zhang Yi thought for a moment, grabbed his phone, and opened the number 25 building's owner group chat. Everyone was freaking out about the explosion, the neighbors all startled awake. What was that noise? Earthquake? Or did we get shelled? Sounded like it came from upstairs. Maybe a meteorite. Could be. What else would cause that temperature spike? Maybe humans are going extinct like the dinosaurs. Total chaos, Zhang Yi said. The workers from number 26 just broke into our building, trying to kill people and steal supplies. I caught them in time and ran them off. Zhang Meng from the 16th floor is dead. And that noise? That was them using explosives. The neighbors immediately panicked. What? We just dealt with Chen Zhenghao. Now these guys from next door are coming after us. They're ruthless. I heard there are fights all the time over there at the construction site. How did number 26 even get in here? Zhang Yi said. They dug a tunnel through the snow and fought their way up from the first floor. Someone immediately said nervously, collapse the tunnel quick. Lock the door, Zhang Yi said, no use. That door will break if you look at it wrong. Even if you block it, they can climb in through the 4th floor window. The neighbors were terrified. If Zhang Yi hadn't stopped them, they might have been dead. What can we do? How are we supposed to beat these guys? Half the people in our building are gone, and most of the rest are old, weak, or women and children. That wasn't exactly true. Most of the people who could fight had died near Zhang Yi's place. Then someone said, thank God we have Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi, you're so strong. You drove them all away yourself. With you here, we're safe. Zhang Yi, you're our hero. Realizing the same thing, others chimed in. Zhang Yi was the strongest guy in their building, and he had a gun. Letting him deal with the workers was the only option. Zhang Yi found the whole thing hilarious. Before, they'd been badmouthing him in the group every day, calling him selfish and shameless. Most families had lost someone because of him, and they hated him. Now, they were sucking up to him, calling him a hero. Did they really think he was that stupid? Zhang Yi curled his lip. I used up a lot of weapons dealing with them. I can barely protect myself. Good luck, everyone. No way he was protecting them. What did he care if they lived or died? After Zhang Yi said that, he went silent. People in the group became frantic, begging him to protect them. Zhang Yi, you can't just let us die. If we all die, it'll just be you two left. Won't you be lonely? We're all dead, you'll become a target. There will be so many people who are going to be watching you. Zhang Yi's eyes turned cold at those words. They were right. Plenty of people were watching him. After all, they must have forwarded the video Zhang Yi posted to the group. Outsiders might be jealous, but the people in the surrounding buildings could come to number 25 and steal everything he had. But he kept quiet. Then, Uncle Yu sent Zhang Yi a private message, asking if he needed help. I know those bastards from number 26. I even drank with them before. What a joke, they came here trying to take advantage of you. I won't let them get away with that. Zhang Yi, tell me your plan and I'll help you deal with them. Zhang Yi smiled. Uncle Yu, there are quite a few of them, right? Uncle Yu said, yeah, there were more than 30 to begin with. But a dozen have died recently, so there are probably about 20 left. I know their boss, Huang Tianfang. We were chatting a while back. But those dogs are living in such a bad way that they killed many people in number 26. I won't join them. Uncle Yu and the workers were both from the countryside. But the workers were mixed up in things, while Uncle Yu had been in the army for years. They weren't on the same level. Chapter 77 Zhang Yi, if you don't come out, I will kill your neighbor. You are listening at novelfull.audio. According to Uncle Yu, Zhang Yi knew a little about these guys. They were a crew working under the name of the nThe Group, an engineering company. They weren't exactly employees, more like subcontractors working for the company. They liked to boast they were employees, though, gave them more credibility. They called themselves the nThe Gang, led by a skinny, short dude named Huang Tianfang. So, Zhang Yi, what are you planning to do about them? Need a hand, just let me know. Uncle Yu offered. Zhang Yi smiled faintly. He wasn't about to go head-to-head with the so-called nThe Gang. His biggest asset was this steel fortress. Stepping outside was risky enough with that number 20 punk, even with a gun. Uncle Yu, better safe than sorry. I'm not looking for revenge right now. It's just me, and even with you, I'm not sure we could win. Unless, he paused, his eyes gleaming, we could get all the neighbors in the building on board. Uncle Yu understood. You mean, like Huang Tianfang and his gang, band together and face the outside world as a unit? Exactly. Okay, I'll bring it up in the group chat. See who's interested. Zhang Yi smiled. No need to rush that, Uncle Yu. If you push it, they'll think you have ulterior motives. They might even blame you. So what do we do? Zhang Yi chuckled. We're in no hurry. We've got enough supplies to wait it out. Those nThe Gang guys are bound to come back. They'll want revenge after I wasted so many of their buddies. When they do, the neighbors will be begging for our help. Uncle Yu sighed. Zhang Yi, you're too smart for your own good. They agreed to play it cool and ignore the nThe Gang for the time being. Meanwhile, the other residents were hoping Zhang Yi and Uncle Yu would take the lead in dealing with them. Classic moral blackmail. They showered Zhang Yi and Uncle Yu with praise, calling them good people, which, in Zhang Yi's book, was practically a curse. Then they'd make excuses about being weak or running out of food. Or they'd refuse to get involved because they were too old or were women. Zhang Yi knew these shameless neighbors all too well and simply ignored them. They'd learn when they felt the heat themselves. For the next couple of days, Zhang Yi focused on gathering intel. He couldn't do it himself, too many people were eyeballing his supplies, and he couldn't trust the info they'd give him, so he asked Zhou Qi and Uncle Yu to do some digging. A doctor and a janitor, they had connections. Zhang Yi wanted to know who in their Yuelu community posed the biggest threat to him. Who'd killed the most people, who was the most powerful now? Zhou Qi eagerly grabbed a pen and paper, compiling a report for Zhang Yi. It outlined the various groups, their numbers, and what weapons they had. After reading it, Zhang Yi felt a lot better. Yuelu community was supposed to be high-end, after all. Not too many truly vicious types. According to Zhou Qi and Uncle Yu, there were two main forces to worry about. First, the Tianhe gang from Building 26 next door. They were built around that small Tianhe group engineering crew and were pretty tough. Their weapons were mostly shovels and steel bars, no guns. The bomb they used on Zhang Yi was homemade by a worker who knew how to blow stuff up, but it wasn't that powerful. And Zhang Yi had burned that guy to a crisp, so no more homemade bombs. Still, Zhang Yi muttered to himself, no telling if they have any left. Gotta be careful. Send some cannon fodder to use them up. Besides the Tianhe gang, there was another group on his radar. In Building 21, a bunch of young punks called themselves the Mad Wolf Gang. Lame name, but apparently they could fight. Zhou Qi's intel said it was a mix of students and street kids, mostly in their early 20s, a dozen or so total. Led by Wang Chang and Xiao Lu. Zhang Yi knew those two. Two-bit thugs from the neighborhood. Stuck-up brats who didn't want to work. They weren't exactly rich, but they were comfortable. They'd hung around long enough to start causing problems. In the old days, they wouldn't have rated a second look compared to Qin Zhenghao. But with no Zhang Yi to keep them in line, they'd gotten cocky. For Zhang Yi, those were the only two groups that posed a real threat. Some buildings had only a handful of people left. A lot of folks couldn't handle the apocalypse. They either cracked and killed themselves, or turned on each other. Zhang Yi felt confident. He told Zhou Qi, keep gathering intel. Need to know what we're up against. Especially guns. Gotta know about guns. Zhou Qi nodded obediently and picked up her phone to keep digging. In the days that followed, Zhang Yi and Uncle Yu stuck to their guns and didn't leave the apartment. The Tianhe gang, meanwhile, was still fuming over their losses. 8 of their guys, gone. The survivors were badly burned. 2 died from their injuries that night. The Tianhe gang had never taken a hit like that. They swore they'd paint number 25 red with blood and kill Zhang Yi for revenge, but here's the thing, they hated Zhang Yi, but they were also terrified of him. They'd seen his methods, and they knew his place was a fortress. So they didn't dare hit him head-on. So what to do? They'd go after Zhang Yi's neighbors. Huang Tianfang figured, if I can't kill Zhang Yi, I'll kill his neighbors. When he sees them die, won't he feel guilty? How will he deal with their accusations? Killing his neighbors will be the best revenge I can get. Huang was channeling his inner AQ, picking on the weak, so, in the following days, he came back with his crew and raided a few apartments. After killing someone, they'd write in blood in the hallway, Zhang Yi, come out, or we kill all your neighbors. Chapter 78 Neighbors Ask for Protection. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Huang Tianfang, thinking he was some kind of genius, offed a bunch of people to smoke Zhang Yi out. In a cheesy movie, the bleeding heart would have stepped up for a negotiation pronto, but Zhang Yi wasn't feeling guilty. He was stoked. His whole plan was to get Huang Tianfang to terrorize the building and get everyone panicking. He wanted them begging him to intervene, and wouldn't you know it, after 2 days, they were. They saw Huang Tianfang's bloody messages and decided Zhang Yi was there. Only shot. Suddenly, Zhang Yi was getting bombarded with messages and calls, everyone begging him to do something. He checked the group chat and saw what the neighbors were saying. Zhang Yi, you gotta fix this mess. You're the one who brought those Tianhe gang guys here, and you're the one who killed them. Why are we paying the price? Yeah, clean up your own act. Don't make us suffer for your mistakes. They said if you don't show up, they'll keep killing. Zhang Yi, if you got any decency, you'll handle this. Can you live with knowing we all died because of you? Zhang Yi grinned when he read the messages. He wasn't even mad because he knew how these people were. He tossed a few messages into the chat. I didn't invite them. So they come to kill me, I defend myself, and somehow I'm the bad guy. You guys can't handle them yourselves. Not my problem. You all agree these guys are dangerous. So, I'm staying put. My place is safe. Hee hee. He even threw in a smiley emoji. The neighbors were livid. Zhang Yi, you're safe. What about us? You're going to get us all killed. Why should we face the guys you brought in? You got no conscience. Zhang Yi just laughed. He knew how shameless they were. He scoffed, why should I care about you? What's it to me if you live or die? Don't talk to me about conscience. When they were attacking my apartment, you were all cheering them on. I'm being nice by not busting down your doors and beating you all to a pulp. But you're crying now, and you dare talk to me about conscience? He finished in a low voice. You think I wouldn't? That shut them up real quick. They suddenly remembered that Zhang Yi was no pushover. What happened to Qin Zhenghao? Frozen solid and then smashed into a million pieces. That was Zhang Yi's doing. Zhang Yi stopped typing and sent a message to Uncle Yu. Uncle Yu, time for your show. Uncle Yu replied, don't worry, I got this. Back in the group chat, the neighbors were stunned. Zhang Yi had shut them down, and the negotiation was dead. That meant they still had to face the Trina gang, who could burst in and start killing any minute. Most of the guys in the building were already dead or injured. Only Zhang Yi and Uncle Yu were capable of fighting back. What are we going to do? We thought getting rid of Qin Zhenghao would save us, but these Tianhe gang guys are even worse. Qin Zhenghao killed to establish himself and get food. Huang Tianfang and his crew were killing for revenge, no rhyme or reason. Are we just going to wait to die? Damn it, how did things get like this? Is this the new normal? The snowstorm isn't ending anytime soon. We're all going to be buried in it. Despair settled in as many thought their time was up. Then, Uncle Yu, usually so quiet, spoke up. Don't panic, people. There are only about 20 of them. We can take them as a team. Uncle Yu's words lit up the group chat. The old security guard was always so reliable. Uncle Yu, thank God you're here. We haven't heard from you in ages. Thought you were dead too. Great, Uncle Yu's here. We're safe now. Tell us what to do, Uncle Yu. We're with you. Uncle Yu read their messages, and his eyes twitched. Support him. They wanted him to do all the work while they watched from the sidelines. He was speechless. Uncle Yu typed, look, I can't do this alone. My family is running out of food too. We haven't eaten in days, and we're too weak to do anything. You're probably in the same boat. How are we supposed to fight the Trina gang like this? Some of the neighbors were silent. Some of them had been eating pretty well, grilling meat and everything. After a while, the bad taste went away. Uncle Yu, what do we do? We're all short on food. There's nothing we can do to help you. A moment ago they were offering support, now they were backing off. If you have any ideas, speak up. We're listening. Here come the nice words. Uncle Yu typed, our building needs to compete with the others. We have to rely on Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi's got plenty of weapons and enough food to eat. He's got the strength we need. He's the best person to lead us. Everyone stared at their screens, speechless. They just ticked Zhang Yi off. Now they wanted him to lead them. Was this a joke? But Zhang Yi just said we were on our own. He won't come out, and we can't make him. Still, he's the best option. They knew Zhang Yi was a jerk, but he was also strong. He's killed half the building already. And Qin Zhenghao? Zhang Yi turned him into a pile of ice chips. Uncle Yu said, well, I can talk to Zhang Yi. I'll see if I can convince him to help. The neighbors all typed at once, Uncle You, we're counting on you. Chapter 79 Conquering Neighbors as Cannon Fodder. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi was watching the group chat like a hawk. Suddenly, Uncle You sent him a private message. Zhang Yi, what's the plan? Zhang Yi replied, the hype's almost done. When the time's right, I'll need you to help me get these people to listen up. A little carrot, a little stick, that's how we keep this building safe going forward. Zhang Yi wasn't sure about their safety, but he was definitely going to be safer. Besides, he planned to send a lot of these neighbors to the front lines as cannon fodder. Most of them had family members Zhang Yi had killed, and they'd definitely seek revenge if they got the chance, so, offing them now was the smartest move. After his little powwow with Zhang Yi, Uncle Yu went back to the group chat. He gave Zhang Yi a shout-out. At Zhang Yi, everyone needs you right now. You'd be pretty lonely if you were the only one left in this building, right? So, please, show us some compassion and help everyone out. We'll all be eternally grateful. That the neighbors chimed in fast. Yeah, if you can save us, we'll owe you big time. From now on, you call the shots in this building. Zhang Yi, our whole family's lives are in your hands. Flattery came cheap, Zhang Yi just sneered. I only came here to talk to you guys because of Uncle Yu. Frankly, I couldn't care less about you. I'm doing just fine on my own. Why should I worry about you? You're still going to have to go out there, grind it out, and risk your necks. Doesn't seem worth it to me. That the more Zhang Yi talked like this, the more uncertain the neighbors became. Zhang Yi, hold on. Look, we'll do whatever you say from now on, okay? That the lure of the easy life was strong, even when staring into the abyss. They'd cling to any glimmer of hope. Zhang Yi asked with a smirk, oh really? You'll do anything I say? Is that a unanimous decision? The neighbors hesitated. Finally, someone spoke up. As long as you don't let us die, we're good with whatever else you want. Zhang Yi retorted, I ask you to grab your weapons and fight the Tianhe gang. You in? Well. The group suddenly fell silent. No one said a word, each waiting for someone else to jump first. Zhang Yi burst out laughing. So, you just want me to do all the heavy lifting, huh? Fine, then I'm not going to bother with you either. When Huang Tianfang shows up with his goons, just stick your necks out and let them chop away. See ya. Uncle Yu panicked. Zhang Yi, don't. We'll listen to you, honest. We're all going to die anyway. If we fight, we still have a shot. I'll go with you. He started rallying the troops again. What are you waiting for? We stand together or die alone. Are we going to just wait for them to pick us off one by one? Uncle Yu's pep talk worked. The thought of a fighting chance sparked some courage, and everyone started agreeing to follow Zhang Yi's lead. Zhang Yi and Uncle Yu, playing good cop and bad cop, had taken control of the entire building. He said calmly, all right, from now on, my way or the highway. The situation's critical. The enemy could attack any minute. Anyone slacking off or dragging their feet will be considered a traitor to the whole building. And don't blame me when I put them down. Zhang Yi scanned the list of group members. Don't let me find out about anyone hiding in the shadows, refusing to come out and fight. Find one, kill one. No free rides allowed. Zhang Yi said this because he'd done a rough count and realized that only about 20 people were actively participating in the chat. Clearly, some people were trying to play ostrich, hoping Zhang Yi would lead the others to fight and die for them. When Zhang Yi said this, the neighbors who had already committed to fighting alongside him weren't happy. Fang Lin, come on out. I know you're not dead. I saw you digging in the snow yesterday. Liang Yulu, where are you? Stop hiding, and don't pretend you haven't seen the group message. We'll find you. The neighbors glared at the ostriches with fire in their eyes. People were selfish. If they were going to risk their lives, they weren't about to let others cower behind them, playing dead. Forced into the light, those people started crawling out of the woodwork. Oh, I just fell asleep and missed the news. Hey, what's going on? We're fighting back. Awesome. I'm not afraid to die, I just didn't see the message. They all sounded guilty as hell. Zhang Yi didn't care. Anyway, since you've all elected me building manager, you do as I say. Anyone who holds back is a traitor to all the owners and deserves to die. That the owners were silent. They knew Zhang Yi would do it. The 50+ dead bodies were bloody proof. After cracking the whip, Zhang Yi decided to throw them a bone. Don't worry, I'm not a monster. I can't stand to see you starve. As long as you follow my orders, I'll go out and find supplies for everyone. Zhang Yi had been planning this for a while. If there were engineering teams using blasting technology, there was no guarantee even stronger enemies wouldn't show up down the road. He was living on the 24th floor. Even though the whole place was made of metal, if the lower floors collapsed, it would still hit him hard. That's why he wanted a group of cannon fodder living down there, acting as sentries and taking the fall when necessary, and he wasn't going to keep them alive without supplies. Zhang Yi sure wasn't going to dip into his own stash, so he'd have to go out and find some, plus, his weapons and ammo were getting low. He'd blown through 20 rounds in that last fight, so he needed to start thinking about restocking. As for getting around, that was easy. The snow outside was 10 meters deep, turning cars into junk. But he had just the thing for that. Snowmobiles. Zhang Yi had 5 snowmobiles in his space, 2 full-sized with cockpits and 3 smaller ones. In this era of heavy snow and city lockdowns, everyone else was struggling just to leave their homes, but he could cruise around the city like he owned the place. The owners' group was in shock. Zhang Yi, you can go out and find supplies? It's snowing like crazy. You can't even drive. You gonna walk through the snow? You'll freeze to death. Zhang Yi said, no matter how bad it is out there, I have to try, for everyone's sake. Don't worry, I've been working in warehousing for years. I know where all the warehouses, malls, and supermarkets are in the city. Finding supplies won't be a problem. Chapter 80 Snowmobile. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It was like the neighbors had found a savior. Even those who were deep in despair, already tucked into bed waiting for the end, suddenly had a spark in their eyes. Zhang Yi, can you really go out and bring back supplies? If you can, we might actually make it. Even with the city locked down by the snow, we've produced enough resources over the decades to survive this. Zhang Yi, I'm really touched. After the way we treated you, you're still willing to. Some started to choke up. After all, most of them had lost family members because of Zhang Yi, but now, their hatred seemed to vanish, replaced by sheer gratitude. Zhang Yi said somberly, now that I'm the building manager, I'm responsible for everyone. Besides, my own supplies are running low too. Scrounging for more is the only way we'll all survive. That reassured everyone. In the apocalypse, if you talk about being a good Samaritan, people will automatically assume you're a phony, but if you have your own needs, they'll think it's natural. It's been almost a month since the world ended. Many people in the building have already starved to death, so they figured no matter how much Zhang Yi had squirreled away, it would eventually run out, especially since there were 2 of them now. Supplies would dwindle even faster. The neighbors gushed their gratitude, praising Zhang Yi like he was a god. Zhou Qiu chuckled, if you started a cult right now, you could be the founder. Religion always thrives during disasters. People need something to believe in. Zhang Yi smiled faintly, no need to complicate things with a bunch of expendables. I can get them to treat me better than their own fathers with just a stale piece of bread. Zhou Qiu asked, her brow furrowed, but do you really have to go out there? That there was worry and guilt in her voice. Zhang Yi knew she thought he was running out of supplies and felt like she was a burden. He pinched her cheek, smiling, don't worry, I have enough to feed you. I'm just looking for the right chance to scout things out. Normally, Zhang Yi wouldn't dare to venture out, fearing attacks from desperate neighbors, but now, he was their only hope, so they wouldn't dare touch him. Zhou Qiu nodded, then I'll go with you. She knew Zhang Yi didn't fully trust her, so she volunteered to accompany him. Zhang Yi looked at her intently and slowly shook his head. With what we have between us, do you really think I still doubt you? A woman should stay home and wait for her man to return. Zhang Yi stood up. Zhou Qiu's eyes welled up with emotion. but the feeling didn't last long. Zhang Yi quickly transferred all the remaining food and coal into his personal space. "I trust you 100%, Zhang Yi said with a smile. Zhou Qier was speechless. She'd been moved just a moment ago, but he was already back to his old self. Zhang Yi ignored her sad expression and went back to the room to change. This was the first time he'd decided to leave the building since the apocalypse began. The city was snowed in, and no living thing was out there, so the risk wasn't too high. Still, he cautiously put on a thick leather jacket. Even a knife wouldn't easily pierce it without some serious force. After a moment's thought, he grabbed 2 frying pans from his space and strapped one to his chest and one to his back. That way, even an ordinary pistol wouldn't damage his vital organs. Finally, he put on his winter coat. He looked bulky, but he felt secure. Zhang Yi grabbed a crowbar over 3 feet long and tested its weight in his hand. In a real fight, this thick crowbar was more useful than a machete. A knife wound wouldn't immediately incapacitate someone, but a solid blow from this would drop them instantly. Zhang Yi took the crowbar, loaded his pistol, and slipped it into his pocket. Fully armed, he left the apartment. It was freezing outside, and even in professional mountaineering gear, you could feel the bite, but the cold wouldn't bother Zhang Yi. He'd warm up after a bit of exercise. He gripped the crowbar and slowly walked down the stairs. He'd survey the surroundings before going any further. Better safe than sorry. No problem so far. Most people weren't foolish enough to overreach. Zhang Yi reached the 4th floor. The Trina gang and others had driven most of the residents to the higher floors, and nobody lived below the 10th floor anymore. Zhang Yi pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was a mess. The windows were shattered, and even the flimsy security bars had been ripped open. The wind howled through the gaping hole. Zhang Yi carefully climbed out through the opening. When his feet touched the ground, the snow reached his knees, but the snow was already packed down, so he didn't sink completely. Still, trudging through it was tough. Zhang Yi looked around. The vast Yuelu community was silent, save for the wind. He didn't spot anyone watching him. Zhang Yi retrieved the snowmobile from his personal space. It was already gassed up. Driving it wasn't complicated. Zhang Yi figured it out after a moment and a quick read of the instructions. He climbed into the vehicle, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. Zhang Yi drove the snowmobile out of the community. As he left, Zhang Yi sensed someone watching him from a window. Not unexpected. After all, there were no signs of humans outside, and the snowmobile was loud. Looks like someone will get greedy for this snowmobile. A smirk touched Zhang Yi's lips. He wasn't worried about drawing attention to the snowmobile. Too many people wanted to take advantage of him. These days, nobody would bat an eye at killing someone for a cookie. As Zhang Yi put it, he had too many debts to pay. The heavy snow had swallowed many small houses, and the streets were unrecognizable. But after living here for over 20 years, Zhang Yi could roughly find his way using the tall landmarks. Getting lost wasn't a problem. Chapter 81 Police Station's Weaponry. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The dead city of Tianhai. A blanket of white snow had swallowed everything. From above, only the outlines of a few skyscrapers peeked through. The rest was a pure white expanse. Zhang Yi zipped across the snow on a snowmobile. After holing up at home for almost a month, this was his first time out for a joyride. The wind whipped past his ears. An awesome feeling. He couldn't help but let out a few whoops. The snowmobile's tracks were hard to miss. As he drove, Zhang Yi spotted figures flickering behind the windows of some high-rises. Even at the end of the world, tough survivors always managed to claw their way through, like cockroaches. This deep freeze was like a megadose of pesticide, but the humans who survived would eventually adapt. Zhang Yi patted the gun in his pocket. A sudden sense of security washing over him. Every person left in the city was a potential threat. In the apocalypse, never trust anyone. Zhang Yi didn't head for the nearest supermarket. He gunned his snowmobile straight for the Tianhai City Police Department. That's where the guns would be. Zhang Yi remembered the saying, all fear comes from a lack of firepower, so, the more weapons, especially the boom-boom kind, the better. After driving for over half an hour, Zhang Yi reached the police station. Most of the building was underwater. The lower 3 floors of the original 6-story structure were completely submerged. Luckily, the police station was a standalone building, and each floor was higher than in a residential building. Otherwise, if he had waited another week or so, there would have been nothing left to salvage. Zhang Yi parked his snowmobile in front of a fourth-floor window. He hopped off, grabbed his lockpicks, and then picked up a crowbar and smashed the window. Crash! Shattered tempered glass rained down. Zhang Yi drew his gun and went inside. It was pitch black, but that wasn't a problem. He pulled a miner's lamp from his personal space, small but powerful. It lit up the area like a mini-sun. Zhang Yi didn't know the layout of the police station, so he had to search room by room on the ice-coated second floor. He forced open a locked door. The scene inside gave him pause. 7 or 8 police officers were huddled together in a corner. They were wrapped in thin blankets, their bodies pale as the snow outside. Zhang Yi took a deep breath, a wave of sadness washing over him. They were all night shift officers. When the snowstorm hit, they didn't even have warm clothes. Judging by their last moments, they had frozen to death. Zhang Yi considered burying them, but then he figured being buried in the ice and snow of the place they had dedicated their lives to might be some kind of fitting end. He bowed his head, paying silent respects to those who had protected the city. Then, carefully stepping around their bodies, he continued his search. The police station was a mess, making the search slow going. When Zhang Yi got tired, he pulled out a bar of high-calorie chocolate from his space, ate it, and kept moving. Almost 2 hours later, he finally found the gun vault, but it was locked. After failing to pick the lock, he smacked himself on the forehead and went back to find the key. Luckily, he knew it would be in the duty room and easy to find. Key in hand, Zhang Yi opened the vault. Opening the gun vault was like opening a treasure chest. Pistols, rifles, dozens of them. He even found a big sniper rifle. He'd never even seen one of these up close before. He didn't even know their names or how to use them. He didn't care. He just grabbed everything, figuring he could study it later, especially the sniper rifle. That thing was boss. It would be awesome for taking out unsuspecting people in the future. Well, even if he wasn't a crack shot, he could still scare the crap out of people. Zhang Yi figured he was a natural with a gun, almost a pro. Especially with pistols. After the apocalypse, his mind seemed clearer, his aim more decisive. Back when they were fighting the Trina gang, he almost never missed. "I'm a natural-born marksman," he smiled, a hint of self-mockery in his voice. Then, he found thousands of rounds of ammunition in the vault. There was also a pile of old confiscated weapons that had been there for ages. Who knew if they even worked? Zhang Yi didn't care. He took it all. He had hit the jackpot this time. Besides guns and ammo, he also found a dozen bulletproof vests and a full set of riot gear, helmets, shields, batons. This is enough to start a serious combat team. Zhang Yi couldn't be happier. He stuffed everything into his inventory. Just finding this stuff made the day a win. The police station was a major score. It also confirmed one thing: there was still plenty of stuff out there. After all, the snow started coming down hard on the night of December 12th. People woke up the next morning to find the snow was more than a meter thick and the temperature was in the deep freeze. So, most people didn't realize the world was ending, and they didn't start panic buying. By the time they realized something was wrong, it was too late to go out. Zhang Yi had what he needed, so he left the police station. The snowmobile outside was covered in a thick layer of snow. Zhang Yi realized he'd been out for most of the day. Time to get those mooching neighbors some pig slop. Zhang Yi thought of the bastards and chuckled. He found a supermarket that wasn't completely buried. He climbed in through a broken window. The inside was mostly bare. The shelves were empty as if the store had just opened. There were some frozen, rotten vegetable leaves on the floor. Zhang Yi rubbed his chin. This place is close to the housing blocks. A convenience store. No surprise it's picked clean. But nobody goes to the big malls out in the city and suburbs. The newer megamalls weren't close to residential areas because the land costs were too high. Zhang Yi worked in warehousing, so he knew which malls in Tianhai City were far from the crowds. He hopped on his snowmobile and headed for the economic development zone. There was a Wanda mall there that had been built just 2 years ago. The nearest apartments were 3 kilometers away, so the chances of it being picked clean were pretty low. Chapter 82: Food for the Neighbors. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhang Yi headed to the Wanda Mall in the economic development zone. Reaching it, all he saw was a single, massive roof. Copying his previous move, he shattered the skylight and rappelled down using a climbing rope. Inside, the mall still held remnants of its former glory. Expensive clothes, shoes, and everyday items were displayed in a circular layout, now worthless and free for the taking. Zhang Yi cherry-picked useful stores, stuffing their entire inventories into his personal space. The supermarket was downstairs. In the basement. After a quick sweep upstairs, he headed down. As he suspected, being far from any residential areas, the supermarket was still fully stocked, but the quality? Questionable at best. The blizzard had caused part of the mall to collapse, letting in freezing air that coated everything in frost. The cold had ruined the food. Puffed snacks and crackers were encased in ice. The vegetables, while not rotten, were severely dehydrated and probably tasteless. The meat section was better, frozen solid, authentic zombie meat, he figured. As for fish, the tanks had burst from the cold, so fish was off the menu. In normal times, this food would have been tossed out, or maybe funneled to a food processing plant through some back channels to be turned into ready-to-eat meals. Zhang Yi shrugged. I wouldn't eat this stuff if you paid me. He didn't even bother bringing it into his space. He wasn't short on supplies. Why waste space on this garbage? Still, this stuff could be useful. Even though the quality was awful, to the neighbors who hadn't had a decent meal in weeks, it'd be gourmet. Zhang Yi pulled 2 large duffel bags from his space and tossed in some of the wilted vegetables and zombie meat. He added stale bread and moisture-swollen crackers. The bags filled up fast. He left the rest behind. Maybe it'd save someone else's life down the road, but he didn't need it. Finished, Zhang Yi glanced at his Rolex. It was cold-resistant, a quality watch that still worked in these temperatures. The time might not be exact, but it was close enough. According to the Rolex, it was 3:30 p.m. It'd take about an hour to get back to Uelu community. No time to waste. He could always come back later. Nobody could compete with him anyway. He'd explore other places later. Zhang Yi left the supermarket with his loot and started back on the snowmobile. By the time he got back to Uelu community, it was dark. Boom! The engine roared in a quiet neighborhood. Faces appeared at every window, staring. In apartment 26, on the 15th floor, Huang Tianfang, the leader of the Tianhe gang, narrowed his eyes at the snowmobile. Half of his face was burned, making him look even meaner. He and some of his crew had barely escaped the fire the other night. The fire had scarred half his face. A snowmobile? That thing could get us out looking for food. No more eating that rotten crap. A dark, overweight guy next to him spoke up. Hey, I know what that is. It's a snowmobile. An electric snowmobile. Huang Tianfang's eyes were glued to Zhang Yi's ride. Whatever it is, we gotta get it. Huang Tianfang wasn't alone. Everyone watching Zhang Yi thought the same thing. After being stuck here for weeks, they were going stir-crazy. Some were about to lose it entirely. They needed to get out, find food and room to breathe. The snow had been holding them back, but Zhang Yi's snowmobile gave them hope. Zhang Yi could feel the greed and the barely concealed hostility in their eyes, but touching the pistol at his hip, and remembering the weapons he'd just hauled back, he felt pretty confident. Dismounting, Zhang Yi looked up and saw his neighbors in apartment 25 also watching him intently. They were focused on the 2 duffel bags he carried. Zhang Yi smirked and pretended to drive the snowmobile to the underground garage in the back. Out of sight, he stashed the snowmobile in his space. Then he lugged the duffel bags the rest of the way. They were heavy, leaving deep tracks in the snow. His neighbors in number 25 were getting so excited they were practically screaming from the windows. Huang Tianfang and his crew were practically drooling. Second uncle, is that food? Fatty Hay asked, pointing at Zhang Yi. Huang Tianfang snapped, duh. What else would he be getting at a time like this? Trying to find a girlfriend. The other gang members started gathering around. He got food. He found food out there. Awesome, we're saved. What are we waiting for? Let's go get him. Grab everything, including the snowmobile. The guys were practically frothing at the mouth. Huang Tianfang hesitated. Hold on. That kid's probably Zhang Yi, the one who killed Chen Zhenghao. He's dangerous. He took out a bunch of our guys last time. We gotta be careful. I heard he's got a gun. If we're going to do this, we do it quiet. Huang Tianfang was cautious. The buildings were right next to each other, but still a good 30 yards apart. Running across the ice and snow was like painting a target on your back. They wanted Zhang Yi supplies, but they weren't going to be stupid about it. But some guys weren't as patient as Huang Tianfang. Some of the crew weren't happy with waiting. They figured if they didn't act now, they'd miss their chance once Zhang Yi got inside. So a few of them grabbed knives and wrenches and sneaked downstairs. Zhang Yi got the supplies through the window and into the hall. Then he pulled out his phone and told Uncle Yu he was back and needed help with the stuff. Actually, he didn't even need to call. Uncle Yu had heard the snowmobile. Uncle Yu was already rushing over to help. Zhang Yi, you found so much. Looking at the two huge duffel bags, Uncle Yu was amazed. With all the snow, other people would have gotten lost. Professionals are professionals for a reason.